Hello, my name is Kimberly Rodriguez, and today I will be discussing pyromania and its role in criminal behavior. Specifically, I will focus on how this disorder is defined clinically, how it impacts an individual's functioning, and how it is interpreted within the legal system. I will also review a real court case to demonstrate how mental health is considered in determining criminal responsibility. Overall, this presentation aims to highlight the intersection between psychology and the law, particularly when it comes to impulse control disorders. So, disorder identification. Pyromania is classified in the DSM 5TR under disruptive, impulse control, and conduct disorder. It involves repeated and intentional fire setting that is driven by internal psychological urges rather than external motivations such as financial gain or revenge. This distinction is critical because it separates pyromania from typical criminal arson. It is also considered a relatively rare disorder, which can make it more difficult to identify and diagnose accurately in both clinical and forensic settings. So, classified through the DSM 5TR, the category is disruptive impulse control and conduct disorder, and characterized by recurrent, deliberate fire setting, uh, driven by internal urges, not external, and considered clinically rare. So, forensic relevance. Pyromania is highly relevant in forensic settings because it is directly tied to arson offenses. So, this can result in serious harm or even death. And it raises important questions about whether behavior is intentional or driven by impaired impulse control. While this disorder may be introduced in legal defenses, courts often prioritize evidence of intent, making it difficult to rely on pyromania as a full defense. This highlights the ongoing tension between clinical understanding and legal standards. So it's very much raising questions between intent versus impaired control, and it's relevant for evaluations. It may be introduced in insanity or mitigation defenses. Definitely, it's often difficult to prove in court, and it raises tension between clinical and legal standards. Hallmark features. Individuals with pyromania typically experience a buildup of emotional tension or arousal before setting a fire. After the act, they often report a sense of relief, gratification, or even pleasure. Many individuals also show a strong fascination with fire, including watching fires or being drawn to fire-related environments. Importantly, the behavior tends to repeat over time, even when the individual is aware of the risk and consequences, which then reflects a pattern of impaired impulse control. Diagnostic criteria considerations. A key part of diagnosing pyromania is ruling out other motivations or conditions. The fire setting behavior cannot be driven by financial gain, revenge, or attempts to cover up another crime. It also cannot be explained by substance use or any other psychotic symptoms such as hallucinations. Additionally, the behavior must cause some level of distress or impairment. These strict criteria make pyromania a very specific diagnosis and can make it challenging to apply in forensic context. Impact on functioning. Pyromania can significantly impact an individual's daily functioning. People with this disorder often struggle with impulse control and may engage in dangerous behaviors despite knowing the potential consequences. This can lead to a repeated legal issues, including arrest and incarceration. It can also affect relationships, employment, and overall stability, as others may lose trust or distance themselves due to the risk associated with the behavior. Causes and contributing factors. The exact causes of pyromania are not fully understood, but research suggests a combination of biological, psychological, and environmental factors. For example, there may be deficits in impulse regulation or decision making processes in the brain. Additionally, individuals may have a history of trauma, neglect, or early exposure to fire setting behavior. Environmental influences and comorbid conditions such as substance use may also increase risk. Overall, it is likely that multiple factors interact to contribute to the development of this disorder. So now let's get into a case example. In the case of Atkins, the defendant set a fire that resulted in multiple fatalities. This case is significant because it raised questions about the defendant's mental state and whether psychological factors should influence criminal responsibility. Although mental health considerations were brought up, the court ultimately focused on the intentional nature of the act when making its decision. So, mental health factors were raised but limited in impact. Legal issues focused on intent and mental state. The defendant was charged and convicted of arson and murder. Role of disorder in the crime. The behavior in this case reflects patterns that can be associated with impulse control disorders, including repeated fire setting and difficulty considering consequences. There may have been an internal buildup of tension or emotional drive leading up to the act. However, one of the main challenges in court is demonstrating that the individual truly lacked control over their behavior. This makes it difficult to connect the clinical features of pyromania directly to legal outcomes. The court ruling. The court ultimately upheld the conviction for first-degree murder, determining that the act of arson was intentional. Even though mental health factors were considered, they were not sufficient to eliminate criminal responsibility. This reflects the legal system's emphasis on accountability, especially in cases where there is significant harm or loss of life. The court prioritized public safety and the severity of the defense. Critical analysis. This case demonstrates both strengths and limitations in the legal system. On one hand, it protects public safety and reinforces accountability. On the other hand, it highlights how impulse control disorders may be under-recognized or not fully integrated into legal decision making. There is often a gap between how mental disorders are understood clinically and how they are applied in court, particularly when it comes to proving impaired control. Position and analysis. I particularly agree with the outcome of this case. Accountability is important, especially given the severity of harm caused. However, I believe that legal system should place greater emphasis on understanding the role of mental health in influencing behavior. A more balanced approach would involve both holding individuals accountable while proving appropriate treatment to reduce the risk of future offenses. Forensic implications. This topic highlights the importance of comprehensive forensic evaluations. It is essential to distinguish between behavior that is driven by intent and behavior that is driven by impaired impulse control. Forensic experts play a critical role in helping courts understand this distinction. This has important implications for sentencing, treatment, and policy development, particularly in cases involving mental health. Conclusion. In conclusion, pyromania is rare, but it's an important disorder that has a clear connection to criminal behavior, specifically arson. It impacts impulse control and decision making, and it raises complex legal and ethical questions. This presentation highlights the need for a more integrated approach that considers both psychological factors and legal standards when evaluating criminal responsibility.